hello everyone. We are here today again for another episode of our podcast, the HyperNet podcast. During these episodes, we talk about some of the most important topics for, in particular, Web3 startups. And today we're going to touch on maybe one of the most overlooked, at the same time, the most important topic in this specific game. So how do we build culture? How do we build culture for a Web3 team that often is remote or hybrid, like 99.9999% of the time, right? And we have the great pleasure to have with us Brad Potter, that is a world thought leader in this specific area. He wrote 3 books about remote work and building culture, and we can't be more happy to have him with us. But without further doing, I will let him the stage so he can introduce himself. I would like to know a little bit more about you, and maybe you can also spend a couple of words explaining how did you get into it? What was the process that brought you in the cultural world, in the culture world?
Sure. Alessio, first of all, thanks very much for the invite. I really appreciate it, and great to be on the show, as it were. So a little bit about me. I got into culture 7 years ago, and it actually was prior to that I ran an executive search firm, and we looked at all the searches we'd run, and we realized that the companies where the searches ran the smoothest and had the best outcomes were the companies that had a better understanding of their culture. And so we started helping companies hire for values fit, and then actually started helping them build their culture, because I was working with VC-backed high-tech companies, and only 1 out of 10 had done anything about their culture. So then I sort of really got into it, and I that's where I found my passion in helping companies develop, strengthen, and build high-performing cultures.
That's very interesting. So basically getting in touch with them, you realized that there was this vacuum. So they were not working enough on their culture, and the company that they had a cohesive culture, they were the one performing the best.
Exactly. And I found that the more that the leadership team and the founders worked on their culture, the smoother things ran. And so it was so fascinating for me, because culture is this invisible, subconscious, intangible black box for most leaders. And so I then started studying culture and really digging deep. My first 2 books were written based on interviews with leaders of high growth companies, understanding what they do in the trenches to really build their culture when funding is challenging, or the market is challenging, or things are difficult, there's some toxicity. So I interviewed leaders and other C-level executives to really understand what it is that people do, and wrote my books based on that. And then really focused on remote work in early 2018 is when I started really working with remote work companies and helping them build their culture.
I cannot agree more with you. I mean, I tried this on my own skin. So I was in a company called Trivago, and there was a super strong culture. I was proud every day of being part of that company, right? You're going around, oh, I'm part of Trivago, you feel happy, you feel connected, you feel this sense of belonging. I was in another company, I felt the opposite. I didn't want to even say that I was working there. I was not part of anything. I was just, a small gear in a big engine. And so I cannot resonate more with you with these, also on a personal level, not even as a manager, not even as an entrepreneur, but also as an employee of a part of a system. You have been in this topic for a very long time, but what is culture for you? What's your personal definition of culture?
Yeah, so my personal definition of culture is the way we do things around here. And it's very broad specifically, because culture isn't just about vision, mission, values. It's much bigger than that, especially in distributed environments. But ultimately, it's in everything. It's the way we talk to our colleagues. It's the way we respond to emails. It's the way we deal with difficult situations. It's the way we behave. For me, that's what culture is. It's all encompassing and it touches every part of an organization.
Okay, it's almost like an invisible texture or the connective tissue that is connecting everything. I like a lot this definition.
Exactly. It's like the glue. And actually,
Exactly the glue.
the stronger the glue is, the tighter the team is, the more in sync the team is. And the weaker the glue, the less effective the team is.
Yeah, absolutely. You already started to introduce another super important topic that is also super important personally for me because this is the third company that I launch completely remote, right? And this changed a lot the rule of the game. And you have been studying, let's say, the more classical, okay, we're all in the same, let's say, environment, we're all in the same office. There is the remote, okay, we are all distributed all over the world, and not only we are distributed, but we have different time zone. And then there is the third variation that, I don't know, maybe can even increase the complexity, you tell me, that is hybrid. So there are people working together and people not working together, right? So how first of all, of course, this is probably, we are not going back from that, right? You know, after COVID and so on and so forth, right? I don't think that we will be going back in a situation where we are always continuously in the same office. Therefore, we just need to probably accept it and create something that works in this specific situation. How do we make it work? How do we make the culture work in these things, right? On a very, or at least let's start with the distinctions, and then maybe we can go a little bit more in the details.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So back in 2018, I worked with office-based clients, and I would deliver workshops in person, et cetera, et cetera. And I was approached by Hotjar, who at the time were about 70 people across Europe, fully remote. And when they approached me, they said they'd like some help with strengthening their culture. And I was really skeptical. I thought, wow, this is going to be like herding cats. It's going to be really tough. How am I going to get everybody together? They're fully remote, so I can't do it in person. But I was very excited to try and learn. And I assumed that the system of culture that I developed would work even for a remote environment. And actually, when I went into that company, when I started to talk to them and interview them, their culture was demonstrated to me much stronger than my office-based clients, hugely stronger, because it turned out because they didn't have an office, they had to work harder because they didn't have the office osmosis, they didn't have the in-person physical proximity. So actually, if you are intentional about building a culture, you can build a very strong, functional, high-performance culture in any environment, whether it's office, whether it's hybrid, or whether it's remote. It is possible, and you can go and research companies like Coinbase who really have worked hard on building their culture and have documented it, which is amazing. The thing about these three is the office. It's almost like you've got a crutch, and when you've got a crutch, you don't need to work so hard, or you don't need to work your muscles so hard. And then going into the pandemic, we lost the crutch, and we realized, oh gosh, what do we do? And a lot of companies then went fully remote or hybrid. And most leaders that I'm seeing now are almost treating their culture as if they were still in the office. They aren't adapting. But if you're going to build a remote environment culture, you have to understand what you've lost from the office and what you've lost from the loss of osmosis, the loss of those advantages of being in the office, and you have to build best practices to overcome those. I believe if you're in a hybrid environment, you have to do the same. The office is less effective, if at all effective, and it creates laziness in leadership, where leaders think because we're in the office, the culture will somehow develop the way we're used to it developing in the past. And it doesn't. It actually... The office, if you look at people who are running hybrid correctly and well, they're actually treating the office differently. They're not treating the office like it was in the past. And so that's really, I believe that hybrid's a much harder culture to build. because of the different biases, the proximity, etc., etc. But it is possible. You just got to work much harder.
Okay. So we are basically saying there are three levels of complexity here. Complete everyone in the office, easy peasy, but well, this is something in the past. And in the Web3 space, basically doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Number two is completely remote, at least everyone on the same level, at least. Hybrid, even more complex, because someone will probably be closer physically, potentially, emotionally, even, on a communication perspective, on a trust perspective, right? And someone will be remote. So you might need to work probably in the third instance even harder, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, the reason why yes, correct, and also the reason why it's harder is the change of mindset to not feel like you're in the office. You're in the office 2 days a week, that's enough. But actually, you're forgetting that your people are working remotely 60% of the time. And your leadership team probably haven't had remote work experience in an environment that was designed for remote work. So that's one of the challenges. So after I worked with Hotjar, I spent 14 months studying GitLab, Buffer, Zapier, TopTel, Doist, Automatic. And I realized that these successful remote work companies are incredibly intentional about overcoming the challenges of not having an office and building best practices to overcome that. So they don't all do documentation the same way, but they are all intentional about documentation. They're intentional about transparency. They're intentional about building social capital, psychological safety, these sorts of things that used to happen more automatically in an office environment.
Very interesting, very interesting. And at the same level, we have seen how major companies that started to go remote because of COVID, that was completely concerned, completely scared, all over the world, right? Probably
Yeah.
this is a little bit on the antithesis, on the opposite side, people that failed to build remote culture and just say, okay, come back to the office here, everything is out of control, oh my goodness, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm seeing a drive towards return to office, the RTO,
Yeah.
go back into the office. But actually, if you look at office data in the US, it's flat. People, you get, when Nike says everybody back into the office, it's a big brand, so people respond. But across the board in hybrid, people are pretty much now, it's flat. The challenge really is, I actually think in this Web3 space, the challenge is helping leaders understand how important culture is.
Yes.
Because many leaders have not experienced a strong culture that they can go and say, I get that, I understand that. And many leaders don't necessarily have the way I look at culture is it's a muscle. And actually they've got their technical muscle very, very, very strong. But their human culture muscle is not as strong. And it's just about building that culture muscle in these builders and founders of Web3.
I'm completely with you. Very often we have, as you know, we work with startups every day. Sometimes we have ultra strong technical founders, right? And at the same time, we might have also people that have before they were just working in an office in the same place, right? In both cases, they might not have that muscle that you were mentioning. So, because we already started to go in a direction, so let's get right into it, in the meaty part. So about Web3 teams that are most of the time completely remote or hybrid, But I would say, if I need, in my opinion, most of them are completely remote, actually. Well, depends on the size, anyway. What are in your opinion, on a high level, the best practices that leaders should start to put in place in order to start growing these muscles? Because, as you just said before, it's not enough just to say, okay, this is our vision, this is our mission, and then puff, then the rest will auto-materialize.
Yeah, I think the first step, really the most important step, is to realize that culture happens whether you like it or not. Whether you're a 4-person R&D project, whether you're an 80-person DeFi protocol or a 500-member DAO, you have a culture. The key question isn't if you have it, it's whether your culture is an asset that works for you or a liability that could work against you. And the best way to do this is to think, as a founder, to think of culture as your operating system. It's either optimized to help your team perform at their best, really like it's really optimized, or it's full of bugs that just slow everything down. And the difference between this optimized operating system or buggy operating system is how deliberately the culture is developed and maintained. And actually, in this Web3 space, it's super important because you've got distributed teams, but you also have in most cases, the additional layer of community, which is external but internal, and it closely follows and amplifies the highs and the lows of your project. So it's an additional layer of complexity when it comes to culture. And I believe actually that you can't look, you're going to get some traders who just trade, etc. But you can actually influence your broader community with your culture. So that's really where the first thing to do is to think about, I have a culture and it can be an asset. I believe that culture is the one sustainable competitive advantage that a Web3 founder has, that the competition cannot impact, because it is such a powerful force if you get it right. So I think the first step is understanding that you have a culture. The second step is then to go and start to define it. And this is about me as a founder. Why am I doing this? What's driving me? And then by understanding yourself, you can then go and understand, okay, this is the culture we need. Look, when it comes to culture, if you believe that people should work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and make as much money as possible, it's absolutely fine. State it, define it, and build and hire the people who want that. If on the other side you want to save the world and you want to work 4 days a week and you want to build a cuddly-feely culture, fine. State it, build it, define it, and recruit those people. Just define it. That's the first step, is actually going and saying, who am I and what culture do I want to build?
Wow. That's very, very interesting. It's a lot to unpack here. So the first things I really loved that you say that the culture exists no matter what. You can decide to ignore it and get whatever comes, right? Maybe it's buggy, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it's toxic, or you can decide deliberately to go for it, to try to understand and influence it. And I also love what you're saying and say it has to be clear, it has to be visible, and when it's visible, you can hire people according to it. But there is one part that I think it's, even more articulated or convoluted for Web3 companies, right? Is what you mentioned related to your culture is not the culture that you have in your team, in your extended team, is the culture potentially around your community that can amplify, everything that is happening, right? So I would like to ask you to go a little bit deeper on that. And I have a follow-up question related, how important is that your internal culture is coherent with your external culture?
So I believe that this is layers. And you start with the founders, the founder or founders define that. The next step really, and a critical piece of this, is actually your internal team, your team of builders who are I know there is a gray often between internal and external, but let's just assume for the time being there isn't. You need to build a resilient culture inside the internal team first, because let's be honest here, crypto isn't for the faint of heart. I mean, 1 month you're on top of the world, The next day, you're explaining to your team why winter is actually good for building. This is a really good time for building because it's winter now, you know, and this is the reality. What nobody tells you about crypto winters is they're not just tests of your technology or tokenomics, they're tests of your team's resilience. And if your team is not resilient, when the markets are down, or when the tweets on X are hostile, or when your Discord is on flames and question everything, or when competitors are falling left and right, you know, what keeps your team showing up? What keeps them building? What keeps them motivated? This is the power in this environment. This is really that glue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Completely true. Completely true. It's really a matter of resilience, right? So probably the strongest the glue, the better it is, because many winter are unforgiving. So a lot of team dissolve. Sometimes it's not even a matter of money. They lose the motivation, you know? They lose the hype. They just give up on it, and that's it, right?
So with
Okay.
the internal with the internal piece, Alessio, there's two pieces. There's winter, but there's also we're on the up now.
Yeah.
Okay, and actually your culture is there to keep you focused on what this means, to keep you from losing focus, from losing that, because winter's going to be just around the corner. And so if you go like this and your culture has dispersed and your business has dispersed in terms of its focus, your organization, your project has dispersed, then all of a sudden you're in trouble again. I think if you build a resilient team that really understands the purpose of what you're doing and buys into that and aligns with your values and buys into that and demonstrates that, then when things go bad, it's okay, fine, we'll deal with it. But actually, it starts to permeate out into the community, because when the community are pecking, the team is responding appropriately in a way that is confident, in a way that is resilient, in a way that communicates the culture, communicates that. And so the way I look at it is you've got your founders, your internal team, then you've got layers of community. On the very outside, you're never going to change the outside of the community. They don't care. They just want up. But actually, on the layers on the inside of the community, you can build those relationships where the community starts to distribute your culture, starts to respond to your culture.
I completely love this metaphor of imagine like an onion, right? Layers by layers, but you start from the core. You start from yourself, then from the closest team that you have, then potentially the people that work closely with you, maybe, I don't know, part-time, then let's say constant contributor, and then you go on and try to create these, coherent culture across the different layers, but starting from the core. I think it is
Exactly.
already a very, very strong recipe. Going a little bit on the practical side, right? Let's say then tomorrow I will start from my internal team, from myself and then from my internal team. What are the practical steps that I must put in place in order to go in the right direction, at least?
So the first thing is to think of culture like a system. You're building a system. And if you get this right, then the system actually is manageable. You get outputs from the system, and you can respond to those outcomes and outputs. But once you've got the mind of, okay, I have a culture, I want to define it and strengthen it, you've got to, the first step is vision and mission. Because the vision and mission are that North Star. It's part of when things are going great, good, we're moving there. If things aren't going great, we're still going there. And it keeps that consistency. The vision is the why. Why are we doing this? And the mission is the what we do to get to the why. So they work together, what and why. And then you look at the personal values, okay? The personal values are, words, they're words, but they're important words like trust, integrity, transparency, and so on. But you've got to define what they mean. If you go and have a look at Coinbase's culture page, they actually define. They have 10 values, and they give you a very clear understanding of what these 10 values mean to us. If you don't do that, they're open to interpretation.
Yes.
And open to interpretation doesn't matter. I think from there you go into defining behaviors. So you've got vision, you've got mission, you've got values. You define what they mean, you define behaviors. And then you build those behaviors into your recruitment process. Because the mistake that many leaders make is they hire based on gut instinct, not based on the fit with the values of the company, of the organization. So you've got, if you define behavior-based interview questions, it's very hard for people to lie or to convince you in a way that you are right for the role. And from there, you've got to look at, okay, how do we onboard now? Because the process is we hire, then we onboard, and we build our culture into the onboarding process. And then from there, we look at, okay, now we've got people operating well. How do we make sure we embed this? We embed this into the organization, into the layers all the way out. And in some organizations, some DAOs, it's not possible to do too much with this, but actually in many organizations, you can decide how you reward and recognize people. You can decide what you measure and pay attention to in the organization. You can decide how you invest and allocate resources. And these are the embedding mechanisms of the culture. So it's going from defining to then embedding and then managing the organization based on this.
I completely see the progression. So mission, vision, mission, values, and then behaviors. And then I think the logical next steps is how do you embed these in your connective tissue? So how can you live the value every day, right? Because it is fantastic if you have done all your beautiful work and you put it on a wiki page, but then what's next, right? I think that this is where it becomes even more important. So embedding this value in your decision-making process, in how, I don't know, you reward people potentially, or how you, in general, how do you live those every day? Do you have any specific suggestions on this level? Of course, it can be very different from company to company, right? But
each culture is different and each organization is different. I think so there's many leaders at this stage think, oh, this sounds like a lot of work. I don't think I have the time. But actually, if you don't invest now, your culture slowly but surely goes in the wrong direction, and then it's much harder to undo. And often you end up you can end up losing the business. So when it comes to culture and embedding, there are actually only 6 ways to embed culture.
Okay.
And the 6 ways to embed culture are basically, it doesn't matter what you say as a leader. What matters is how you reward and recognize. So if you reward and recognize the wrong behavior, then people will continue to do that behavior, and more people will do it because of the recognition. So you've got to understand what behavior you want to reward and recognize. You also want to, the second embedding mechanism is what you measure and pay attention to. So if you measure behaviors and you measure the way people respond on email, or you measure the way people communicate in Discord, you pay attention to that, then your team know that you're measuring and pay attention to it, and they adapt accordingly. How you hire, fire, and promote is another embedding mechanism. If you hire people who match your values, you reinforce the culture. If you promote people for the wrong behaviors, other people will also do that because they want to be promoted. Then how you behave in crisis situations. If you are two people, if you are one person in the good times and another person in the bad times, they refer to this person. They don't trust the dual personality. They think you are the person who is more the crisis person, who screams or rants or raves or doesn't behave well. Then what you train and mentor and educate, so how you train people embeds your culture, and then where you invest and allocate resources, it embeds your culture. So those are the 6 embedding mechanisms that what I do with leaders is I give them a framework. And I say, okay, what are we going to reward and recognize? What are we going to measure and pay attention to? What are we going to train, mentor, and educate? How are we going to prepare for crisis situations? How are we going to recruit and promote? And how are we going to demonstrate that some of our resources, the budget is allocated to the culture, to reinforcing and strengthening the culture?
Well, thanks a lot for giving all the 6 1. I think it's very, very enlightening. I think one of the all of them I think are super important. But what it really struck my attention is well, hiring according to your culture, right? So you cannot hire the wrong people, and then hopefully this person will align with your culture. It's much easier that you hire a person who is already aligned with your culture, right? That foster your culture that you have inside, right? And then it's all the mechanism of basically of incentives. So where you put your attention, how you reward people, how you fire people, how you run basically a tight ship connected to your foundational value. And
Exactly.
does these, does the first rule of communication apply? The first rule of communication is repetition. So how often these, let's say, mechanisms need to be somehow visible to make sure that slowly and steady penetrated in the connective tissue of your company?
So repetition is you've just hit the nail on the head. You're spot on. The important element of communication and repetition are important. What's more important is habituating these things, so that it becomes a habit for the leader. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to even consider it. It's just there, and it's happening as part of their meeting agenda, as part of their end of week leadership meeting, and then the leader. David Darmanin, who is the CEO of Hotjar, when I worked with them in 2018, every single post he wrote, he wrote it in a way to refer to one or more of the values of the company. That was his habit. He always did it. And if you look at the blog posts or any of the writing he did, he would say, at Hotjar, this is why this value is important to us. And this is how this team member lived that value. It became part of his habit. It became part of the way he thought about it. And that's really, repetition is vital. And actually, if your people start rolling their eyes, it means it's getting through.
It's okay, guys. We had it up to here. We got it. This one. Please stop. Okay.
No. And the best thing is, the CEO must laugh. The founder, the builder must laugh and go, "Yeah, I know you've got it, but I'm going to keep on doing it."
Oh, I love that. I love that. So people need to sweat the foundational value, right? Like, okay, I got it. It's full of me now. I love that. Okay. To this point, right? I think a very important. I have a very important question again in this. At least I believe that it's important. So, how much the culture is created by the founder, and how much this is co-created by the company, right? So, because I think this is where do we position ourselves? As an entrepreneur, I started 3 companies. So how much is my culture that I need to influence, I need to try to convey, or how much I need to co-create the culture with the others?
It does depend on the leader to a degree, but ultimately the culture is going to come from the leaders. That is that founding team, those first 3 or 4 people. But if you haven't defined it, and then you start to grow really quickly, your culture can, especially in a distributed environment, can become the culture of the loudest voice.
Yeah.
Because the broader team aren't going to hear you as the leader all the time. They're not going to experience you. You're going to be too busy raising the next round, or you're going to be busy dealing with customers, and your business your team's going from 20, 30, 50, 100 people really quickly. Yeah. Those 80 people don't know your culture, and if you haven't defined it and recruited well against those values, then they're learning culture through their team manager. They're learning culture through listening to the loudest voice, not necessarily you as the leader. So because you didn't systematize it early enough, that rapid growth could come back to bite you.
Okay. I see. And I see, that we are also touching on a very, very important topic, right? So creating this embedding system where you are four people, great. You can be the one, in the stand-up meeting, repeating every day the values and, of course, embedding it in every things that happen. But if you move from four people to 400 people, then how do you manage this transition, And would you say that, somehow this transition might be managed as we were discussing a little bit before? So the onion metaphor. So first of all, you need to try to make sure that the four people around you, they really believe the same as you in the same culture 100%, So during this rapid growth, somehow these things keep spreading. Is it, am I going in the right direction with this assumption?
Yes, absolutely. So actually, as I'm sure you know, the biggest reason for startup failure is lack of co-founder
Breakup.
alignment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yes, that is step one. Is the way I see this is assuming you and your co-founder are aligned. When it depends, but if I give you if I gave you a timeline, then I would say if there are 2, 3, 4 of you in a room, or not in a room, but building together, then start to talk about this stuff. Start to define it. Don't spend too much time on it but if you're actively thinking about it and you're referring to it, then you've got your vision, your mission, your values. Over time, you can define these. And then when it gets to maybe 10 people, 12 people, then you can have culture conversations. You can be more deliberate about it. But as soon as it starts to go 20, 30, 40, if you haven't done any work during that time, then you need to really invest heavily now. Because if it's going to go 20, 30, 40, 100, 200, the chaos and the liability that your culture can become is a high risk, and it's not worth the risk.
Okay, so what I'm bringing home here is also work on it as soon as possible, So work on it even before you become the successful company, or let's say the scale up, work on it thoroughly from the beginning, that when you start to increase the size of your team, it is already the operating system, as you said before, and it will be much easier to manage this expansion, and their culture is not going to deal you to completely be buggy and be the operating system that actually destroy you, but I help you to grow in an organic way. That's what that I think I'm bringing home here.
Absolutely. So if you think about the logic of it, your vision and mission are the why and the what. Your values are the how we behave to deliver on the mission every day, to deliver on the vision. And then the behaviors, obviously, are the how, but actually your behaviors then give you the tools to build a behavior-based interview process. And now you are hiring people based on your behaviors and your culture, which means that you don't have to have done too much work now, but you've got a lot of the foundations in place to do this well. So I know that builders are super busy. They don't have time for this. That most of them don't. This is a little bit too far away. It's not in my wheelhouse. It's not what I'm good at. But actually, the more you start to think about and talk about it early, the better. Right? You're spot on there. If you haven't done any work and you're starting to scale at 30 or 40, you can start to do this now. It is just a little bit harder. That's all.
Yeah, got your point. Okay. Sometimes, for some people, it's easy to define things by contrast. So I would like to ask you, what are the pitfalls? So things that must not be done, because so far we tried to define a journey to get there. But what are the most important mistakes to avoid?
So the most important mistakes to avoid are, first of all, not doing anything. Secondly, is to to not be authentic about your culture,
Yep.
to imagine something that is not who you are. This is a route to failure, because ultimately it doesn't matter what you would like your culture to be. Your culture will be a mirror of who you are as a founder. So if understanding really what's driving you will then allow you to hire people who are also driven in the same way, versus hiring people who think it's going to be a much easier job and it's not. The third classical error that I see is that it's a tick box. Okay, we've done vision, mission, values, behaviors, maybe. Okay, bye, and life carries on. Nothing changes. They don't embed it. They don't make it intentional. And I believe that culture is as important as engineering, as DevOps, as customer success, and it should be a function in the business, because it is that important and that valuable for the business as an asset. So those are the three things that early stage teams often make a mistake of not doing.
Well, I really like the first and the third, were something that I was, well aware of. But the number two, I think it's also, super important, right? If you try to build a culture that is not yourself, there will be sooner or later there will be a contrast. It's like when verbal communication and non-verbal communication are disconnected. You are sending weird message. People don't understand you. People doubt you. You come out as dishonest, right? It's never gonna work. So I really like these what we mentioned now, right? So first of all, understand 100% what you want, where you're going as a founder, before even communicating it, right? So there is an important part even of self-awareness in this. So how much do you know what you're really doing and why you're doing it? And when you know it, ideally very, very well, then you are probably ready to communicate and not create additional frictions on several levels. Okay, I really like that. I think this is super important.
I just wanted to pick up on one word you mentioned there that I think there might be something to explore here. One of the things that founders don't realize is the friction, the increased friction of working in a remote manner, where in an office you could bump into somebody in the hallway and go, "Did you see that? Did you hear that? Chat." Or you could pop to their desk and go, "Quick question on that." But what happens now? What happens in remote is people are in different time zones. People have different work schedules. So you've got to build a system, once again, that eliminates as much friction as possible, that overcomes the operational inefficiency of friction. And understanding where the friction is happening in your team and in your organization is part of building an effective culture and operating system in your remote or distributed team.
I see completely the point. Do you have a specific? I mean, I'm sure you do. Do you have a tangible example of this? So you identify an issue and you try, to remodel somehow the culture around it to overcome it.
It's not so much remodeling the culture as going and saying, if culture is the way we do things around here, then collaboration is part of culture. And where is the friction happening in collaboration right now? And the friction could be in using too much synchronous communication, too many meetings, too many calls, and not doing enough async, where the async removes the friction of being in person and allows for people to work when they need to work and respond when they need to respond. So building an async capability is one of the ways to remove. It feels like you're increasing friction, but actually if you build it properly, you remove friction from the remote system.
Okay, so being very intentional about what your culture is and also what's your communication strategy, right? Because that's something where I have seen several remote teams struggling a bit. How do we communicate? Do we communicate via Slack? We communicate via meeting. Do we need to be online? We don't need to be online. How often we don't need to be online. And all those things, and there are
Yeah.
millions of shades of gray. And I think that according to our discussion, one is being transparent upfront about this and how this is connected with our values that are connected with our vision and mission potentially, right?
Absolutely. So if you, as a founder, if you come in and say very early on, this is the way I believe we should work, that means you will recruit people who also believe that, like from an asynchronous point of view or a synchronous point of view, or a Slack versus Teams versus this versus that. This is the way we're going to work here. So this is our culture. And the way we're going to work is we will, for example, all be online in these overlapping times. Mm-hmm. That's the way we work around here. That's our culture. If you can't be overlapping in that times, we won't recruit you because you're outside of our overlap time. Or we will adapt our culture in that situation. So that's, if there's friction in recruitment, maybe that does require you to adapt that part of your culture. But you're not adapting necessarily your vision, mission, and values. You're more adapting a collaboration methodology of your culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, I think this is very, very enlightening. And, I will propose you now some few topics that I'm aware of also. First, because I've been working with a bunch of startups, that they all have similar topics. Second, because I also built 3 companies remote. So the first one is related to building trust, right? Building trust in a remote first team is much more difficult, than people that hang out and go to the pizza place all together, right? Sorry, I'm Italian, so I need to, of course, think about pizza, at the moment. Well, so what are your suggestions, in terms of culture, or also, just considering your very, very deep knowledge about remote working? How do we build trust with a remote team?
So there are a number of ways that contribute towards building trust. If I look at GitLab, Buffer, Zapier, TopTel, Doist, they all are incredibly transparent. And transparency is the key piece to building trust, one of the key aspects to building trust, because if I'm transparent, I have nothing to hide. And if I have nothing to hide, you can trust me. Because you see what I do, because I'm transparent about what I do. You understand how I think and how I make decisions because I'm transparent about those things. And this transparency gives you the ability to understand more, to access the information you need to get your job done, to interact effectively with me as a colleague in the organization. So transparency really builds trust. And if you look at, probably the most transparent organization I've come across is Buffer, where even the CEO's salary and salary calculation is on the website. So they really have nothing to hide, which takes the stress out of working in an environment. Because if I know where to get everything I need to do my job, and I understand the decisions and rationale, and the organization is transparent with me, I trust the team, I trust the leaders, and I trust the organization.
I completely love that. I really love that, transparency as an engine of trust, right? So making sure that people don't need to second guess, try to have, of course, straightforward communication, always polite, but straightforward communication, avoiding to hide anything, being as open as possible with your team. And of course, as usual, leading with example, not with words, right? So words is one thing, example is another thing. People will always do potentially what a leader does, not always what the leader say, right?
Yeah, what they do is way more important.
Exactly, way more important. Definitely a stronger weight in a thing. I remember myself, in in Trivago, I was burning out people unintentionally, but not because I wanted to have to burn them out. It's just because I was going full power every day, every Saturday, every Sunday. I was constantly working, and it doesn't matter if I was telling them, take rest, stay home, take as many time as you need, get holidays. But me going full power, full power, full power every day, my team was going full power every day. And I was having problem there. And when I realized I had to really stop and, and potentially create a different level of culture in my team, I would say. So I remember that moment. It was very, 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 very sad and enlightening at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, that was super great. And what about, I think that another big problem that many people leading a remote team have, it decreasing performance, right? So you have someone that at some point it doesn't, produce value the same as before, right? And potentially is also part of culture. You don't know exactly why. So if you probably build a good culture, at least these people were telling you that. But assuming you don't know, what would you do? What would be the antidote to that?
So one of the best practices that many remote work companies that I study is built around one-to-one meetings.
Yes.
And first of all, most well-run remote work companies, the team size is no bigger than 7 because it's very hard to have a weekly one-to-one with more than 7 people.
Yeah.
So the best practice is run one-to-one meetings every week with your direct team. Allow the team member to set the agenda for the meeting. And your job as the leader is to listen and guide, give examples, and help where possible. If the person wants to talk about their family holiday, you talk about that. If the person wants to talk about performance, you talk about that. But ultimately, if you have that kind of one-to-one relationship with your team, it's very unlikely that you will be surprised by performance.
Yep.
Because if they have a problem and they trust you as somebody who has their back, they will tell you why they are not performing well or why they're not performing effectively. What I would do if I was in, let's say I took over a team that was not performing. What I would do, one of the things that I would implement is a tool called Task Relevant Maturity. And Task Relevant Maturity is a very effective framework for leading distributed teams, where you work out to what extent has a person, let's say you've got a project and it's got 5 tasks. To what extent does the person have the ability to do these tasks from their past? If they have high task relevant maturity, it means they've done this task many times. If they have low task relevant maturity, it means I need to train, mentor, and monitor as the manager. It's my responsibility. So if I took over a low performing team, I would understand their task relevant maturity or capabilities against the projects that they were working on. And then I would agree a program to not micromanage, but to train, monitor, and mentor as needed. So that's how I would deal with poor performance in a team or in an individual. Because ultimately, the poor performance, on the one hand, may be because they don't care and they're not interested and they want to leave. I would want to understand that. If you want to go and work somewhere else, I will try and help you get the job because you're not happy here. If you're underperforming, very few people join a company to go and say, I really don't want to perform. I don't want to grow and develop. I don't want to succeed. People join a company because they want to perform, succeed, grow, and develop their skills and learnings and improve ultimately. So if the person doesn't want to do that, I would say, okay, let me help you out. If the person does want to do that, I would agree a program based around task relevant maturity to help them succeed.
Absolutely. And I think this is also connected to the topic of motivation, right? So because it's another thing, you know, people might stop performing just because they're not motivated enough. They might, and motivation is probably another big area. What's your take on that, right? So motivation might be related to their journey, might be to the level of challenge, might be if they are feeling that they're growing in the role, if they have a path forward. What's your special take on that?
Yeah, I think there must be inherent motivation. It's actually quite hard to motivate somebody who doesn't want to do something, who doesn't believe in what they're doing. So
Yeah.
if you've employed somebody who doesn't really believe in your vision and your mission and doesn't align with your values, motivating them without threatening them is not easy. So there must be that inherent motivation that this person actually believes in what we're doing and wants to do what do they do. Situations can change. You know, you can get somebody who, when they joined your organization, was 23 and young and was happy to be a nomad and travel the world. And now they're 27 and they've got 2 children. And all of a sudden, life changes. And it's not easy to necessarily motivate based on life changes. But I believe that motivating someone, yes, as a manager, it's your job to create an environment where they can fulfill their potential. But really, motivating somebody who doesn't believe in what you're doing is really tough.
It's a very good point. It's a very, very good point. Of course, circumstances might change, but at the beginning, hiring people with the right mindset, aligned with your culture, with the internal motivation, it will solve a lot of headache, right? Along at the beginning, at least, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it is super important. And I think we touched briefly on it, in particular with the matter of the onion. How culture, what's the role of culture in an organization? They have a different type of hierarchy, like in a DAO, in a decentralized autonomous organization. So in that specific situation, you don't have, let's say, yes, of course, you have someone that is maybe the initiator of the DAO. You might have a few people that are more influent of others. You might have investors, but the hierarchy is completely different. Do we consider, building culture exactly in the same way, or do we have a different blueprint in that situation?
So there aren't many DAOs that operate completely decentralized.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't many DAOs that have actually, from what I can see, realized the decentralized goals of,
Yeah.
and the reason for that is because it's hard. It's really, really hard for a business to run autonomously without yes, you can put the systems documentation and processes in place, but ultimately there is a human element to all of this. And so I believe if a DAO has been formed and the DAO has been going for some time, you are still going to get the culture of the founder or founders, of those initial people. They built this thing for a reason. And they designed it in this way because of their fundamental beliefs of changing the world or changing the financial system or changing the way we govern or whatever it is. They have fundamental beliefs, and that is where the culture is. There is no organization that doesn't have a culture. You may have a DAO that has subcultures and different forms of culture, but I believe that's because the founder, the founding individuals of the DAO weren't intentional about embedding their thinking and their beliefs into the DAO enough. So that I honestly believe that there isn't an organization that can exist without a culture, and the culture will form itself around the groups of people who work together.
Oh, for sure. No, I agree with you 1000%. The culture exists anyway. The thing is, it is intentional or not. Are you trying to building it, or you just let it go and whatever it forms, right? So in a so-called DAO, also in the most decentralized one, there was always at the beginning. a beginning of people getting together toward a specific purpose, and they probably need to build a culture eventually, maybe even more than the others, right? Maybe. Uh,
Absolutely.
all right, all right. Um, okay, before we go toward the end, do you want to add something? Because this conversation was already mind blowing for me. Is there anything else that you think? Look, Alessio, we discussed about so many things today, but there are a few takeaways that I think you should consider before we move toward the end of this fantastic discussion.
Yeah, I think one thing that every organization struggles with, and that I think is even more difficult in Web3, is what I call the brilliant jerk. So the brilliant jerk is someone who is brilliant at their role and manages up very well, or manages across very well, but is a real jerk when it comes to dealing with the team. And the brilliant jerk is often very brilliant, but destructive and toxic.
Yeah.
And there are very few organizations I've ever seen that get away with having a brilliant jerk. So for me, I believe that brilliant jerks, the toxicity that they leave and the impact on the productivity of the rest of the team means that they must be extracted very quickly. They must be terminated as quickly as possible. Or you build a new culture around that brilliant jerk. Because their individual culture and the team, because the team, when they joined you, they heard what you said either explicitly or implicitly about the culture. And that's why they joined you. Now you bring somebody in who doesn't match that and behaves in ways that are counterproductive, and that impacts the productivity of everybody else. So the brilliant jerk is not easy, but I believe should be terminated, or you change the culture.
Wow, that's a very important one, because maybe the brilliant jerk is also very capable on the political level, on let's say with peers and with the layers on top of him, right? So it's even more difficult to get him, because you need to have specific information coming from his team, probably, right?
Yeah, it's not easy, but there are very few leaders who don't know. If you're in touch with your team, you know that the impact this jerk is having.
Absolutely. So find it and ideally remove it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the amount of insights were completely incredible. I'm completely, surprised and amazed by the level of depth and your knowledge. But if someone wants to interact with you, want to learn some more from you, I know that you have a specific, program also specifically for Web3 team. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes. So I'm launching the Web3 Culture and Leadership Program in December. It's something that I've been building with some advisors from the crypto and Web3 space. And basically, it's a program that is bite-sized videos where it's about an hour and 10 minutes, which covers the 9 steps any founder should take to build that foundational layer of their culture. And so it's about 80 minutes of video, but it's a program that you implement over 12 months. So it says, okay, this is why vision and mission are important. This is what it is. This is what your vision is, what your mission is. Now here's an exercise. Go and do this with your team. Go and do that for the next 4 to 6 weeks. Then the next step is understand your current culture. Here's a survey. Go and take the survey with your team, analyze the survey data, and then take the next step. And the next step is defining your core values. Go and do this with your team. Take 3 weeks to do that. Okay, now you've got your core values. Now we define the behaviors. Go and do that with your team. So it's basically a 6 to 12 month program where you watch the video, you do the exercise with your team, and then you just build and build your culture over 12 months.
Well, I think that it's absolutely fantastic. It's like a blueprint, like a framework to put in place everything we've been discussing today, and it's so important, to start to build your culture as soon as possible. It's going to be available in December, correct? So quite
Correct,
soon.
in December. Yeah.
Or,
In
all
December,
right, where we can find it on your website?
on the website, and I think, Alessio, if you we can take this offline, but if you would like, we can do some sort of a discount program for the HyperNest community.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, because definitely we would suggest to all our startups that for sure we should definitely go for it. So we need to continue the conversation about it. And if I'm not mistaken, they can find you at culturegene.ai. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. If they want to reach out to me, as you can tell, I'm happy to talk about culture until the cows come home. And so if they want to reach out to me directly, they can email me, brett@culturegene.ai. And I love talking about culture, what people are doing right, what people are struggling with. I'm happy to jump on a call and just with some of your portfolio companies, at James's event in Lisbon, we had a couple of side conversations where I learned and they learned, and that's exactly what I love about this. There's no one size fits all to culture. It's beautiful. It's amazing.
That's fantastic, and your enthusiasm and knowledge, it's very, very easy to see. So we'll put also your email in basically the description of this podcast. And what can I say? We're super grateful to have you here. Thanks a lot for sharing with us so many information, so many good insider tips. And well, a suggestion for everyone: start work on your culture. And last but not least, subscribe on your podcast, on our podcast, HyperNet Podcast. We're going to shoot fantastic video and audio of great thought leaders and startups for Web3 startups every 2 weeks. Have a beautiful day, and well, looking forward to reconnect with all of you.